I still remember the exact moment my world shattered into a million pieces. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that makes you believe nothing significant could possibly happen. The fluorescent lights of the conference room buzzed overhead, casting their sterile glow across the polished mahogany table where I sat with my colleagues, my heart pounding with anticipation. For 5 years, I had given everything to Crawford Financial Solutions. 5 years of late nights, missed holidays, sacrificed relationships, and countless weekends spent hunched over spreadsheets and client proposals. This was supposed to be my moment. The director of operations position had been my goal since my very first day, and Daniel Crawford himself had promised me, not once but dozens of times, that when the position opened up, it would be mine. But as I sat in that conference room, watching Daniel walk in with that practiced smile of his, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Jessica Palmer was walking right beside him, and she was wearing an expensive new blazer I had never seen before, the kind you buy when you know you have something to celebrate. The words that came out of Daniel's mouth next would haunt me for months to come. He talked about growth, evolution, and bringing fresh perspectives to leadership. He talked about recognizing potential and rewarding dedication. And then he announced that Jessica Palmer, a woman who had been with the company for barely 18 months, would be assuming the role of Director of Operations effective immediately. The room fell silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as colleagues who knew about Daniel's promises to me carefully avoided meeting my eyes. Jessica stood there with a modest smile that did not quite reach her eyes, accepting congratulations from people who were too shocked to know what else to do. I sat frozen in my chair, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how 5 years of loyalty and hard work could be dismissed so casually. But what I did not know in that moment, what I would not discover for several more weeks, was that Jessica Palmer had not earned that position through merit or potential. She had earned it in a far more insidious way, and the truth of her relationship with Daniel Crawford would eventually unravel everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand what I sacrificed to get to that conference room, and why Daniel's betrayal cut so deep it nearly destroyed me. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker and a waitress who never had the luxury of thinking about careers or ambition. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and I learned early that if I wanted anything in life, I would have to fight for it myself. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, working 3 jobs simultaneously just to afford textbooks. When I landed an interview at Crawford Financial Solutions straight out of graduate school, I could barely afford the bus fare to get there. But I showed up in a secondhand blazer that I had carefully altered myself, and I impressed everyone in that room with my preparation, my ideas, and my hunger to succeed. Daniel Crawford hired me on the spot. He shook my hand and told me that he saw something special in me, something that reminded him of himself when he was younger. He said he had started this company with nothing but a dream and a willingness to outwork everyone around him, and he recognized that same fire in my eyes. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word that came out of his mouth because I wanted so desperately to believe that talent and hard work could transcend circumstances. Over the next 5 years, I poured my soul into that company. I came in early and stayed late. I took on projects nobody else wanted. I solved problems that seemed impossible. I brought in clients who had initially refused to work with us. I trained new employees, developed systems that increased efficiency by 30%, and saved the company from at least 2 potential lawsuits through my meticulous attention to detail. Daniel noticed all of it. He praised me publicly, gave me raises and bonuses, and repeatedly told me that I was invaluable. During performance reviews, he would look me in the eye and say, "Sarah, when the Director of Operations position opens up, there is no one else I would even consider. You have earned it." Those words kept me going through the hard times. They kept me going when I missed my father's 60th birthday party because of a client emergency. They kept me going when my college roommate got married and I could not attend because we were in the middle of a crucial audit. They kept me going when my boyfriend of 2 years finally left me because I never had time for him, because I was always at the office, always working, always chasing a future that Daniel promised would be worth the sacrifice. I told myself it would all be worth it. I told myself that once I had that director position, I could finally start living my life. I could finally prove to everyone back home that a girl from nowhere could become somebody. But all those promises turned to ash in that conference room, and the person who took everything from me was a woman I had barely even noticed until she stole my future. Jessica Palmer had joined Crawford Financial Solutions about a year and a half before the announcement. I remember her first day because Daniel personally walked her around the office and introduced her to everyone, which was unusual. Typically, new hires were handled by HR and given the standard orientation tour. But Daniel seemed particularly invested in making sure Jessica felt welcome. I did not think much of it at the time. She was pretty in a polished, expensive way that suggested she had never had to work a retail job or clip coupons. Her resume was thin, and her experience was limited to a brief stint at her father's insurance company and a few years doing administrative work at a nonprofit, nothing that should have qualified her for a position at a company like ours. But Daniel insisted she had tremendous potential, and he assigned her to work under my supervision for training. That was my first mistake. I actually tried to help her. I spent hours teaching Jessica the systems, explaining our client protocols, and sharing the shortcuts I had developed over years of trial and error. She was pleasant enough on the surface, always smiling, always grateful, always telling me how much she admired my work ethic and how lucky she felt to be learning from me. But looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way her eyes would sharpen when I showed her something important, like she was filing it away for later use. The way she always seemed to be texting someone when she thought no one was watching. The way she and Daniel seemed to have private jokes, little smiles that passed between them in meetings that made me uncomfortable without understanding why. I was too focused on my work to pay attention to office dynamics, and I trusted Daniel too much to question his judgment. That trust was about to cost me everything. The day after the announcement, I did something I am not proud of. I went to Daniel's office, closed the door behind me, and asked him directly what had happened. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried to maintain my professionalism, but I could hear the tremor in my words as I reminded him of every promise he had made. He leaned back in his leather chair, his expression sympathetic but somehow distant, like he was looking at me through glass. He told me that Jessica had demonstrated exceptional leadership qualities in recent months. He told me that sometimes potential outweighs experience. He told me that this decision was not a reflection of my value to the company and that my time would come. Then he had the audacity to ask if I would help train Jessica for her new role, since I knew the operations better than anyone. I walked out of that office feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. The humiliation was overwhelming. Everyone knew what Daniel had promised me, and now everyone would watch as I trained the woman who had taken my position. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, mechanically completing tasks while my mind raced through every possible explanation. Had I done something wrong? Had I made some mistake I was not aware of? Had Jessica somehow proven herself in ways I had not noticed? I replayed every interaction, every project, every evaluation, trying to find where I had failed. But no matter how hard I looked, I could not find any reasonable justification for what had happened. That was when a small voice in the back of my mind started whispering that maybe the explanation was not reasonable at all. The first real clue came 2 weeks later, and it came from the most unexpected source. Marcus Chen worked in our IT department, a quiet, unassuming man who had been with the company almost as long as I had. We had always been friendly in a polite, professional way, exchanging small talk in the break room and occasionally grabbing lunch when our schedules aligned. But that Friday afternoon, Marcus approached my desk with an expression I had never seen on his face before. He looked troubled, almost guilty, like he was carrying a burden he could no longer bear alone. He asked if I had a minute to talk privately, and something in his tone made me say yes immediately. We walked to a quiet corner of the parking garage, where the security cameras did not reach, and Marcus told me something that made my blood run cold. He said he had been doing routine maintenance on the company email server the previous week, when he accidentally stumbled across a series of messages between Daniel Crawford and Jessica Palmer. Messages that were very clearly not professional in nature. Messages that dated back to before Jessica was even hired at the company. I felt my hands start to shake as Marcus explained what he had seen. The emails were romantic, explicit in some cases, and they painted a picture of a relationship that had been going on for at least 2 years. Daniel had met Jessica at some charity gala, and their affair had begun shortly after. She had applied to Crawford Financial Solutions specifically because Daniel wanted her close by, wanted to be able to see her every day without raising suspicion. Her entire career at this company had been manufactured. I asked Marcus why he was telling me this, and his answer surprised me. He said he had been passed over for promotions 3 times, always watching less qualified people climb the ladder while he stayed stuck in the same position. He said he was tired of watching good people get crushed by those who played dirty games. He said he thought I deserved to know the truth, even if he did not know what I would do with it. Then he handed me a flash drive and told me he had copied those emails along with other records that might be useful. He said he could lose his job for this, so he needed to trust that I would not reveal him as the source. I took that flash drive with trembling fingers and thanked him with tears in my eyes. For the first time since the announcement, I did not feel alone. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine that remained untouched on the table beside me. I plugged in the flash drive and began reading through the files Marcus had given me. The emails were worse than I had imagined. They were not just romantic, they were strategic. Daniel and Jessica had been planning her advancement from the very beginning. There were discussions about which positions she should target, which employees might be obstacles, and how to navigate the situation with Daniel's wife. His wife. I had almost forgotten that Daniel was married. Linda Crawford was a graceful woman in her early 40s who occasionally visited the office for company events. She seemed kind and genuine, always taking time to learn employees' names and asking about their families. The emails revealed that Daniel had been lying to her for years and that Jessica had been more than happy to be his secret, knowing full well that she was helping destroy another woman's marriage. But the emails were just the beginning. The flash drive also contained expense reports that showed Daniel had been using company funds to pay for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and even a weekend trip to the Bahamas that had been disguised as a business development conference. There were receipts for jewelry and designer clothing, all billed to obscure accounting categories that would not attract attention. Daniel had not just betrayed me professionally. He had been embezzling from his own company to fund his affair. The scope of his deception was staggering, and all of it pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Jessica's promotion had nothing to do with her abilities and everything to do with the fact that she was sleeping with the boss. My 5 years of sacrifice had been rendered meaningless by a woman who had cheated her way to the top and a man who had used my trust as a tool for his own manipulation. I did not sleep that night. I sat with the weight of this knowledge pressing down on me, trying to decide what to do with it. Part of me wanted to march into the office the next morning and throw those emails in Daniel's face. I wanted to watch him squirm, wanted to see the fear in his eyes when he realized his carefully constructed lies were about to collapse. But another part of me, a wiser part, knew that reacting emotionally would only give him the advantage. He would find a way to spin it, to discredit me, to claim I was a bitter employee making false accusations because I was passed over for promotion. No, if I was going to expose Daniel Crawford and Jessica Palmer, I needed to do it methodically, strategically, in a way that would leave no room for them to escape the consequences of their actions. I needed to think like them, but better. I needed to become someone they never saw coming. Over the next several weeks, I developed a plan. The first step was to gather more evidence, to build a case so airtight that not even the most expensive lawyer could poke holes in it. I started paying closer attention to everything around me at the office, noting patterns and behaviors I had previously ignored. I noticed that Daniel often left for extended lunch meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always claiming to be meeting with clients. I noticed that Jessica's schedule mysteriously aligned with these absences, and that she would return looking slightly disheveled with her hair quickly repinned. I noticed the way they avoided looking at each other in meetings, a deliberate distance that felt practiced rather than natural. The more I watched, the more I saw, and I began documenting everything in a private journal that I kept hidden in my apartment. I also started making strategic friendships with people I had previously overlooked. The administrative assistants who handled travel bookings and expense reports, the security guard who monitored the parking garage cameras, the cleaning crew who worked late and noticed things that daytime employees never saw. I was careful not to ask direct questions, not to seem like I was investigating anything. Instead, I became a better listener, more attentive and interested in others. People started confiding in me about things they had observed, complaints they had about favoritism, suspicions they had never voiced to anyone. Slowly, piece by piece, a fuller picture of Daniel Crawford's corruption began to emerge. He had been manipulating more than just my career. He had been manipulating the entire company for his own benefit, and Jessica was just the latest and most extreme example. One of the most useful connections I made was with a woman named Patricia, who worked in the accounting department. She was in her late 50s, a quiet woman who had been with the company since its early days. We started having lunch together once a week, and over time, Patricia revealed that she had long suspected something was wrong with certain expense accounts. Numbers did not add up, receipts were sometimes missing or obviously falsified. She had brought her concerns to Daniel once, several years ago, and he had dismissed them so harshly that she never mentioned it again. She was too close to retirement to risk her pension over what she assumed was just sloppiness. But when I gently suggested that the discrepancies might be more than sloppiness, her eyes lit up with recognition. She told me she had copies of the questionable documents kept in a personal file at home because she did not trust anyone at the office. When I asked if she would be willing to share them with me, she hesitated for a long moment before nodding slowly. She said she had always liked me, had always thought I was one of the good ones. She said if anyone could make sense of this mess, it would be me. The documents Patricia provided were a goldmine. They showed years of financial irregularities, all connected to expense accounts that Daniel personally approved. Hotel bills for dates when no business trips were scheduled, restaurant receipts for meetings that never appeared on any calendar, consulting fees paid to companies that did not seem to exist. When I cross-referenced these with the emails Marcus had given me, the pattern was undeniable. Daniel had been systematically stealing from the company to fund his affairs, not just with Jessica, but apparently with at least one other woman before her. The total amount was substantial, easily in the six figures over the years. This was not just an ethics violation, it was potential fraud. I finally had the ammunition I needed, but I was not ready to use it yet. There was one more piece of the puzzle I needed to put in place. I started watching Jessica more carefully, not with anger anymore, but with cold calculation. I needed to understand her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities, the cracks in her carefully polished facade. It did not take long to find them. For all her confidence and designer clothing, Jessica was fundamentally insecure. She constantly sought validation from Daniel, sending him texts throughout the day and looking anxious when he did not immediately respond. She was jealous of any woman who got too close to him, including me, which explained some of the subtle hostility I had felt from her since starting to train her. And she was careless. She left her phone unlocked on her desk when she stepped away. She talked on personal calls in the break room where anyone could overhear. She assumed that everyone was too intimidated by her relationship with Daniel to pay attention to her activities. That assumption was about to become her downfall. The opportunity I needed came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Jessica had left her laptop open while she ran to the bathroom, and I happened to be walking past her desk. My heart pounding, I quickly glanced at her screen and saw that she was logged into a personal email account, different from her company email. The account was open to a draft message, and what I read in those few seconds changed everything. Jessica was communicating with someone about leaving Daniel. She was complaining that he had not yet made plans to divorce his wife as he had promised. She was hinting that she had information that could destroy him if he did not follow through on his commitments. I quickly memorized the email address of the recipient and walked away before anyone noticed me lingering. That night, I did some digging and discovered that the email belonged to Jessica's cousin, a woman who ran a small beauty salon in New Jersey. It seemed Jessica had been confiding in her about the affair for some time. This revelation gave me a crucial insight into the dynamics between Daniel and Jessica. Their relationship was not the loving partnership it might have seemed. It was transactional, built on mutual exploitation and the threat of mutually assured destruction. Daniel had used Jessica to feed his ego and satisfy his desires, while Jessica had used Daniel to advance her career and fund her expensive lifestyle. But now the arrangement was fraying. Jessica wanted more than Daniel was willing to give, and she was growing impatient. If I played my cards right, I might be able to use this tension to my advantage. The best revenge, I was learning, was not about destroying your enemies directly. It was about creating the conditions for them to destroy themselves. 3 months had passed since the announcement, and I had been playing the role of the defeated, demoralized employee perfectly. I continued to help train Jessica, even though every interaction made my skin crawl. I attended meetings and contributed just enough to appear competent, but not so much that I drew attention to myself. I wanted Daniel and Jessica to believe that I had accepted my fate, that I was too beaten down to pose any threat. Meanwhile, I was quietly building relationships with key board members through carefully orchestrated encounters at industry events. I was connecting with journalists who covered corporate scandals. I was researching whistleblower protections and consulting with a lawyer friend about the best way to present evidence of financial misconduct. Every piece of my plan was falling into place, and they had no idea what was coming. The breaking point came faster than I expected. It happened because of Linda Crawford, Daniel's wife, and it happened because she turned out to be far more perceptive than anyone had given her credit for. I did not know this at the time, but Linda had apparently noticed changes in Daniel's behavior over the past year. He was distant, preoccupied, and defensive whenever she asked about work. She had started to suspect that something was wrong, although she did not know exactly what. And then fate intervened in a way that I could not have anticipated. Linda decided to surprise Daniel at the office one afternoon, bringing him lunch from his favorite restaurant. She walked through the doors just as Daniel and Jessica were returning from one of their Tuesday meetings, and the expression on Daniel's face apparently told her everything she needed to know. I was not there to witness it, but according to the gossip that spread through the office like wildfire, Linda took one look at them and walked away without a word. She did not need to see anything explicit. She simply knew in that instinctive way that betrayed partners often do. The atmosphere in the office changed dramatically after that day. Daniel became irritable and short-tempered, snapping at employees for minor mistakes and disappearing into his office for hours at a time. Jessica walked around with a brittle smile that did not quite mask the fear in her eyes. Rumors began to circulate about trouble in the Crawford marriage, about potential divorce proceedings, about Linda meeting with lawyers. I watched all of this unfold with a mix of satisfaction and impatience. The situation was deteriorating on its own, but I wanted to accelerate the process. I wanted Daniel and Jessica to experience the same helpless desperation they had inflicted on me, and I wanted to make sure that when the final blow came, it would be impossible for either of them to recover. I made my move on a Friday evening, timing it carefully to maximize impact. I had prepared a comprehensive dossier containing the emails, the expense reports, the witness statements, and my own documented observations. I had organized everything chronologically and included supporting evidence for every claim. Then I sent it, not to Daniel, not to HR, but to 3 carefully selected recipients: the chairman of the board, the lead partner at the accounting firm that handled our audits, and a journalist at a well-respected business publication who had a reputation for investigating corporate misconduct. I also sent a copy to Linda Crawford at an email address I had obtained through discreet means, along with a personal note expressing my sympathy for her situation and assuring her that the evidence would speak for itself. The wait was excruciating. The entire weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. Had I done the right thing? Had I gone too far? Would they believe the evidence, or would Daniel somehow manage to discredit it all? I barely slept, barely ate, just sat in my apartment staring at my phone and waiting for something to happen. By Sunday afternoon, I was convinced that I had made a terrible mistake, that nothing would change, that Daniel would somehow emerge unscathed and I would be exposed as the bitter, vengeful employee he would surely paint me as. But then Monday morning arrived, and everything exploded. I arrived at the office to find the parking lot filled with unfamiliar cars. Inside, the atmosphere was tense and chaotic. Daniel's office door was closed, but through the glass walls, I could see him surrounded by men in suits who were clearly not employees. His face was pale, almost gray, and his hands were shaking as he spoke to them. Jessica was nowhere to be seen, and her desk was already being cleared out by someone from HR. Whispers raced through the office like electricity. The board had called an emergency meeting. Auditors were examining the financial records. Daniel was being asked to take administrative leave pending an investigation. By noon, he was gone, escorted out of the building by security, carrying nothing but his phone and his car keys. The man who had controlled my career for 5 years, who had promised me the world and then snatched it away, walked past my desk without even looking at me, but I looked at him. I watched every step he took, and I memorized the expression on his face. It was the look of a man who had finally run out of lies. The investigation that followed was thorough and merciless. The board brought in outside attorneys and forensic.